The bus rattled down the long stretch of asphalt leading to the Naval Training Command in Virginia, carrying 4 new recruits who had no idea how much their lives were about to change. The air was heavy with the smell of salt water, sweat, and nervous anticipation, the kind of atmosphere that clings to young men about to be remade by the military. Private Miller leaned against the window, his reflection half hidden behind the glare. "So this is it," he muttered, "where boys turn into legends. Or corpses." Cruz shot back with a grin. He was the joker of the group, short, wiry, and full of misplaced confidence. "Relax, Miller. We're the new blood. The Navy's lucky to have us." Thompson, sitting across the aisle, smirked but said nothing. He had that cold, unreadable expression, a man who didn't speak unless it mattered. Next to him, Reeves adjusted his cap nervously, trying not to look as scared as he felt. The others were loud, brash, and sure of themselves. Reeves was quiet, the kind of recruit who followed orders before questioning them. When the bus finally screeched to a halt in front of the base gates, the 4 of them stepped out into the biting wind. The massive American flag overhead cracked sharply, echoing across the yard. A group of officers stood nearby, watching the new arrivals. A tall man in uniform barked, "Welcome to Naval Training Command. From this moment on, you are no longer civilians. You are property of the United States Navy. You will sweat, you will bleed, and some of you will break. But those who endure, will earn the right to call themselves SEALs." The recruits straightened their backs instinctively. The words sent a thrill through them. This was what they came for. As they marched toward the barracks, Miller nudged Cruz. "Think we'll meet any real SEALs here?" Cruz laughed. "You kidding? Those guys are ghosts. We'll probably never see one unless we screw up bad enough." But fate had other plans. The base was alive with movement, trainees running drills, instructors shouting orders, and the constant metallic rhythm of discipline. Amid the chaos, one figure stood out, though not in the way they expected. She was walking across the courtyard, a woman in standard fatigues, sleeves rolled up, hair tied neatly under her cap. There was nothing flashy about her. She wasn't towering or imposing. Her steps were quiet but purposeful, her gaze sharp yet distant. Reeves noticed her first. "Hey, who's that?" Cruz snorted. "Probably admin staff. Maybe logistics." But then someone whispered from behind them, "That's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow." Miller frowned. "Lieutenant Commander? She doesn't look like a soldier?" The voice interrupted. "She's a Navy SEAL." The group turned, half in disbelief. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "No way, SEALs don't." "They're not." He stopped short. No one wanted to finish that sentence. The base was full of stories about Sarah Harlow. Some said she was one of the first women to complete Bud-S training, a feat nearly impossible for anyone, let alone someone who looked so calm, so ordinary. Others whispered darker rumors, that she'd led a classified rescue in Afghanistan and lost her entire unit in an ambush. She'd returned alone. No one asked her what happened after that. As she walked past them, she didn't glance their way, but the aura around her demanded silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Still don't buy it," Cruz muttered once she was gone. "She's too small, too quiet. SEALs are supposed to be, intense. You can see it in their eyes." "Maybe she hides it," Miller said. "Maybe she doesn't need to prove it." Cruz laughed. "Come on, man. You think someone like her could outlast us in a fight?" Reeves said nothing, but he could feel something strange, an uneasiness crawling in his chest. He didn't know if it was respect or fear, but he sensed there was more to the woman than her calm face revealed. That night, in the barracks, they couldn't stop talking about her. "I heard she can hold her breath underwater for 5 minutes," one recruit whispered. Someone said she broke a guy's ribs during hand-to-hand drills, another added. Cruz leaned back on his bunk, smirking. Rumors. I bet she's just an instructor who got lucky. You'll see. Miller turned toward him. You planning to find out? Cruz shrugged. Maybe. What's the worst that could happen? The next morning, the recruits woke before sunrise. The air was cold, the ground damp with dew. They joined the others in formation, waiting for orders. From across the yard, Lieutenant Commander Harlow approached, the same quiet stride, the same unreadable calm. She gave no speech, no introduction. She simply looked at them and said, Today, you'll learn to listen. Hours passed in grueling silence. They ran obstacle courses, carried logs, crawled through mud, but not once did she raise her voice. She observed everything, how they moved, how they failed, how they complained. And when one of them muttered something under his breath, she heard it. By afternoon, Cruz was exhausted and irritated. You'd think a SEAL would do more than stare, he said. Miller chuckled. Maybe she's scared we'll show her up. That was the moment she turned. Her eyes locked on them, cold and sharp. You four, she said, voice level but commanding. Training yard. 15 minutes. The other recruits backed away immediately. They'd seen that look before. It meant trouble. As the four approached the yard, Cruz's grin faded. She was waiting for them alone, hands behind her back. You have something to prove? She asked quietly. Cruz opened his mouth, but no words came. Show me, she said. They hesitated. Thompson muttered, Ma'am, we didn't mean. But she stepped forward, cutting him off. You want to know what makes a SEAL? You think it's strength? Size? Ego? Her eyes swept over them. Try me. The silence was heavy. Then, as if by instinct, Miller moved first, reaching to grab her arm in a playful challenge. What happened next lasted less than half a minute. She pivoted, grabbed his wrist, and sent him crashing to the ground. Cruz lunged forward. She sidestepped, swept his legs, and he hit the dirt hard. Reeves and Thompson tried to react, but before they could move, she had Reeves' arm locked and Thompson's shoulder pinned. 30 seconds. Every sound in the yard stopped. The four lay stunned in the dust, gasping for breath, faces flushed with shock and disbelief. Sarah stepped back, calm as ever. Never judge quiet strength, she said simply. It's the one that ends you before you blink. Without another word, she walked away, leaving four humbled recruits staring after her. The yard buzzed as other trainees whispered among themselves. Miller sat up slowly, brushing dirt off his face. Did that just happen? Cruz groaned. I don't even know what she did. Thompson looked toward the direction she disappeared. She didn't even break a sweat. Reeves said softly, she didn't have to. For the first time since arriving, the four recruits were completely silent. The laughter, the arrogance, gone. In 30 seconds, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow had dismantled every illusion they had about strength. That night, long after lights out, Miller lay awake staring at the ceiling. She's something else, he whispered. Yeah, Cruz replied, still nursing his pride. Something terrifying. None of them knew it yet. But that single encounter, 30 seconds of truth, was the beginning of everything that would define their journey, their bond, and the lesson that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Morning sunlight spread across the base like fire on metal, harsh, unforgiving, and unrelenting. The four recruits Miller, Cruz, Thompson, and Reeves walked to formation with the uneasy silence of men who had witnessed something they couldn't explain. The memory of the yard replayed in their heads, over and over again. 30 seconds. That's all it took for Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow to drop all 4 of them like paper dolls. None of them could figure out how. Her movements had been too fast, too precise. Cruz, rubbing his shoulder, muttered, "I must have slipped." Thompson gave a flat stare. "Sure, you slipped into the dirt after she threw you." Miller grunted. "She didn't even flinch. I've seen instructors get mad, but she—" He hesitated. "She's like a machine." Reeves didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence was agreement enough. When the whistle blew, the recruits snapped to attention. Their commanding officer, Chief Petty Officer Daniels, strode up and down the line, barking orders. "You are not here to think. You are here to obey. Every second you waste doubting yourself, you die in combat." Sarah stood behind him, hands clasped behind her back. Her expression was unreadable, that same unsettling calm. But to the 4 recruits who had seen her in action, she was something entirely different now. After formation, Daniels dismissed them for drills. Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You 4, she said, her tone cool but commanding. "With me." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Cruz whispered, "We're dead." They followed her across the yard toward an open training area surrounded by sandbags and obstacle rigs. The morning heat was already rising, the air thick with humidity. Sarah stopped in the center and turned to face them. "Yesterday," she began, "you decided to test me." No one answered. Miller swallowed hard. Sarah continued, her eyes moving across each of their faces. "You thought because I'm smaller, quieter, that I couldn't be what I am. That mistake, it's people killed." Cruz couldn't hold it in. "With respect, ma'am, we didn't mean—" "Stop," she said sharply. The word sliced through the air. "Meaning doesn't matter. Actions do." The silence that followed felt endless. Then she pointed toward the far end of the field. "Run the obstacle course. 10 laps. Full gear." Thompson frowned. 10? That'll take— Time starts now." No one argued again. They sprinted. The obstacle course was hell. Ropes, walls, trenches, and crawl nets, all soaked with morning dew. After 2 laps, Cruz was already gasping. Miller's boots were heavy with mud. Thompson kept his pace, determined not to fall behind. Reeves lagged a few feet back, struggling to breathe. Sarah stood at the start line, stopwatch in hand, eyes expressionless. She didn't yell. She didn't motivate. She just watched, like she was measuring something deeper than endurance. By the 5th lap, the recruits were barely standing. Miller stumbled coming down the rope wall and landed hard, rolling to his feet again. "Keep moving," Thompson shouted. Sarah didn't intervene. Her silence burned more than words ever could. By lap 8, Cruz collapsed near the trench, clutching his chest. Reeves tried to help, but Sarah's voice cut across the field. "No help, not yet." Reeves froze. Cruz groaned, face in the dirt. "You want to be SEALs?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, not angry, just razor sharp. "Then act like it. Get up, Cruz." Cruz coughed. "I can't, then crawl," she said. And he did. Inch by inch. Every muscle screamed, but he refused to stop. By the time they finished the 10th lap, the recruits were on their knees, gasping, soaked with sweat and mud. Sarah approached them slowly, her boots crunching in the dirt. She stopped in front of Miller, who was barely holding himself up. "You think being loud makes you strong?" He shook his head weakly. "No, ma'am." She turned to Cruz. "You think strength comes from muscle?" He forced a breath. "No, ma'am." "Then where does it come from?" No one answered. Sarah crouched beside them. Her tone softened, just slightly. "Strength is in control. Control of your fear. Your mind, your body. Without it, you're just chaos in a uniform. They listened, hanging on every word. She stood again, her gaze steady. You'll report to me at 0500 tomorrow. Until you learn control, you're not trainees, you're liabilities. Then she turned and walked away. That night, the barracks were quiet. The other recruits laughed, played cards, and told stories, but the four who'd faced Sarah were silent. Miller sat on his bunk, wrapping tape around his bleeding hands. She doesn't talk like an instructor, he said. She talks like someone who's seen things. Thompson nodded slowly. You saw her eyes today? Reeves said quietly. She's not angry. She's haunted. Cruz snorted weakly, though even he didn't believe his own sarcasm. Haunted? Maybe she's just built different. No one replied. They all knew he was wrong. The next morning, before sunrise, they assembled in the yard as ordered. The sky was gray and heavy with mist. Sarah was already there, waiting. You're early, she said. Yes, ma'am, Miller replied. Good. Let's see if you learned anything. She pointed toward a small wooden dock near the ocean training zone. You're going for a swim. Cruz blinked. In that water? It's freezing. Sarah raised an eyebrow. So is the Pacific at 2 a.m. in combat? Go. They dove in one by one. The shock of cold hit like electricity, stealing their breath. The waves pulled hard, dragging them under. Sarah's voice carried from the dock. Control your breathing. Panic wastes oxygen. Reeves coughed, sputtering as salt water filled his nose. Miller grabbed his arm. Keep your head up. They fought to stay afloat, teeth chattering, arms burning. Sarah didn't move to help. She watched, expression unreadable, stopwatch ticking. After 15 minutes, she called them back. They climbed out, shivering violently. Why didn't you help us? Cruz asked through clenched teeth. Sarah met his gaze evenly. Because no one will help you out there. You either survive or you don't. And survival isn't luck, it's control. Her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, none of them felt anger, only respect. Later that day, Sarah stood alone near the training yard, arms folded, watching the recruits run drills. Chief Daniels approached quietly. You're riding those four hard, he said. Sarah didn't look at him. They needed it. Daniels studied her. They remind you of someone? She hesitated, then said, Yeah, me, once. He nodded and walked off, leaving her with her thoughts. The waves crashed faintly in the distance, a sound that always took her back to the mission she never talked about, the one where her entire team didn't make it home. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Never again, she thought. Not if I can help it. That evening, as the recruits ate in silence, Thompson broke it. She's different, he said. Cruz nodded reluctantly. She doesn't care about breaking us. She wants to make us better. Reeves lifted his head. She already has. Miller smiled faintly. You realize what this means, right? We've got no choice now. We either rise to her level or drown trying. For the first time since arriving, they all shared the same look, not of fear, but determination. Outside, Sarah watched from the shadows near the mess hall window. A rare, quiet smile tugged at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, these four had potential after all. That night, as the base lights dimmed, the recruits lay in their bunks listening to the distant hum of the ocean. Their muscles ached, their bodies broken, but their minds were sharper, steadier. For the first time, they understood what Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow had tried to teach them. Strength wasn't in defiance. It was in discipline. Power wasn't in challenge. It was in control. And respect, the kind that lasts forever, could only be earned in silence. Dawn broke pale and colorless over the base, a thin mist crawling off the Atlantic. 500. The whistle hadn't even sounded yet, but the 4 recruits were already lined up at the edge of the training field. The memory of the previous day still burned in their muscles and in their pride. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow stepped out of the fog as if she'd been waiting there all night. No salute, no smile, only a small clipboard under her arm. "You're early," she said. Miller answered first. "We figured you'd appreciate that, Mom." She nodded once. "You figured right." Then, without raising her voice, she said, "Drop and give me 50. They obeyed instantly. The cold ground bit into their palms. Every push-up felt heavier than the last, but none of them dared quit. Sarah crouched beside them. "Yesterday you ran. Today you'll listen. If you learn to listen, you'll learn to survive." When they finished, she motioned toward the obstacle course. "Pair up. You're responsible for each other's time. If one fails, both repeat." Cruz groaned quietly, earning a glare from Thompson, who ended up paired with him. Miller took Reeves. The whistle blew. The first lap was chaos. Cruz's foot caught a rope, sending both him and Thompson crashing into the dirt. Miller tried to haul Reeves over a wall, but slipped, splitting his palm. Sarah didn't intervene. She simply watched, jotting notes on her clipboard, her expression unreadable. After the run, she walked up to the group, still gasping for breath. "What happened?" Cruz started to explain, but she raised a hand. "Excuses are wind. Wind doesn't move walls." She pointed at the ropes again. "Reset. Same pairs. You've got 20 minutes to beat your time." They went again harder this time. Thompson stopped yelling orders and started giving calm directions. Miller learned to lift with rhythm, so Reeves could grab the top plank. Their coordination sharpened. By the final lap, they crossed the finish line 2 minutes faster. Sarah clicked her stopwatch, expression still calm. "Better," she said. Not good, but better. For reasons none of them understood, that single word better felt like a medal. The rest of the morning was a blur of drills. Fireman carries, simulated rescues, blind navigation runs. The recruits learned quickly that Sarah's lessons weren't random. Every exercise forced them to rely on trust, not ego. At lunch, they sat together at the edge of the mess hall. Their trays were untouched. Exhaustion had killed their appetites. Cruz finally spoke. "You think she'll ever tell us what she's really doing?" Reeves shook his head. "She already is. We're just too dumb to see it." Miller stared out toward the yard, where Sarah was speaking with Chief Daniels. "She's different," he said. "When other instructors yell, you want to fight back. When she looks at you, you just want to be better." Thompson gave a small nod. "Because she's not trying to win. She's trying to make us win." That afternoon, Sarah led them to the armory for weapons handling drills. She moved like a shadow between rows of rifles and training pistols. "This," she said, picking up a weapon, "is the last thing you should rely on." The recruits exchanged puzzled glances. "Anyone can pull a trigger," she continued. "But it takes control to decide when not to." She demonstrated disassembly and reassembly with mechanical precision, her hands a blur. "Every piece matters," she said. "Miss one, and it fails you when you need it most." People are the same. Cruz whispered to Thompson, "You think she rehearses these lines?" Without looking up, Sarah said, "No, I live them." Silence. Even the clatter of metal stopped. By evening, they were back at the docks. The sky had darkened to steel gray, and the ocean chopped restlessly against the pilings. Sarah faced them. "You've all been wet and cold before. Tonight you'll learn to stay that way." She ordered them into the water again. The temperature knifed through their uniforms. Stay afloat as a unit. She shouted. Use each other. No talking, communicate without words. Waves slammed into them, breaking formation. Miller grabbed Reeves's arm before he went under. Thompson motioned with his chin for Cruz to circle left. They adjusted instinctively, learning silent rhythm in chaos. Minutes turned to nearly half an hour before she called them in. When they dragged themselves onto the dock, shaking and blue-lipped, she crouched beside them. You kept each other alive. That's the first thing you've done, right, all week. Miller exhaled a weak laugh. Feels good to hear that, Mom. Sarah allowed the ghost of a smile. Don't get used to it. That night, after showers and chow, the four men gathered quietly behind the barracks. The moon hung low and bright. Cruz stared up at it. I thought being a SEAL meant guns, missions, glory. She's teaching us something completely different. Thompson rubbed the scar forming on his knuckles. She's teaching us control. She said it herself. Control of fear. Reeves added softly. Control of pride. Miller nodded. And control of each other. For a moment, they sat in silence, hearing only the distant crash of waves and the rhythmic sound of late-night drills somewhere across the base. Then Cruz smirked faintly. Still can't believe she took us all down in 30 seconds. Thompson chuckled. 30 seconds changed everything. At 2,300, the barracks lights went out, but Sarah remained awake in her quarters. She sat by the window, reviewing the day's notes. Next to her bed sat a faded photo 7 soldiers in combat gear, smiling beneath the Afghan sun. She was in the center. 6 of them were gone now. She touched the photo briefly, then folded it into her journal. Her thoughts drifted to the 4 recruits. They remind me of you, she thought silently. Cocky, hairless, alive. Maybe this time I can get it right. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, and she felt the same ache she always did before sleep, the ache of unfinished duty. At 0430 the next morning, before any alarms, the 4 recruits stood outside her office door. She opened it, surprised. You're early again. Miller spoke for them. We want to train longer, ma'am. Sarah studied them for a long moment. Their faces were still young, but harder now disciplined. She nodded. All right. But understand this. Once you start walking the path, there's no turning back. You break, you rebuild. You fail, you learn. You quit? Her eyes darkened. And you never come back. We understand, Thompson said firmly. Good, she replied. Then let's begin. She led them toward the dawn, their shadows stretching long across the sand. And for the first time since the tragedy that had defined her, Sarah Harlow felt something close to hope. That morning marked the real beginning of their transformation. No longer 4 arrogant newcomers, but 4 soldiers in the slow, painful process of becoming a team. The lesson had begun, and Sarah intended to make sure they learned it the only way that mattered, through blood, discipline, and the quiet kind of strength that could turn fear into purpose. The 4th week of training broke harder than any before. Sleep was a memory, warmth a myth. The recruits had learned to survive on adrenaline, grit, and the echo of Sarah's relentless commands. By now, they knew her rhythm. Minimal sleep, maximum expectation. She trained with them, ran with them, and when they faltered, she never yelled. Her silence carried more weight than any scream. But this week, something was different. The drills were harsher, the tasks impossibly timed. And Sarah's tone had shifted, colder, sharper. It was as if she was testing something deeper than endurance. At dawn, they were waist-deep in icy surf again, waves crashing against their torsos, as Sarah stood calmly on the dock, stopwatch in hand. You think you've improved, she said, her voice steady over the wind. But improvement means nothing without resilience. Let's see who quits first. Ma'am, Miller shouted, voice trembling. No one quits here. Prove it, she replied. Hours passed. Lips turned blue. Limbs went numb. Thompson's teeth chattered so hard his jaw locked. Cruz tried cracking a joke, but his voice broke halfway through. Reeves was the first to start drifting under. Miller grabbed him, hauling him back above water, gasping, I got you. Sarah blew the whistle. Out! They stumbled onto the shore, collapsing onto the sand, coughing up seawater. Sarah paced in front of them. This is where most break. Tell me why you didn't. Miller, still on his knees, answered between breaths. Because we've got each other. Sarah stopped. A flicker of something, maybe pride, maybe sorrow, crossed her face. Good, she said softly. Then you're worth teaching. That night, thunder rolled over the base. The rain came in sheets, turning the dirt field into mud. They were ordered out again, shoveling, hauling, sprinting. The recruits were near collapse. When Cruz slipped and fell face first in the mud, he didn't get up. Thompson turned to help him, but Sarah's voice cut through the storm. Leave him. Thompson froze. Ma'am? You heard me, she said. He's done. Leave him. For the first time, the recruits hesitated against her order. Reeves took a step toward Cruz. Sarah's voice hardened. If he stays down, he's dead weight. In the field, you can't drag dead weight. The three men stood in stunned silence. The rain hammered down, their bodies trembling. Then Miller moved defiant. He hauled Cruz to his feet, slinging his arm over his shoulder. If he's dead weight, Miller said through gritted teeth, then I'll carry him until he isn't. Sarah's eyes locked on his, cold steel meeting fire. After a long silence, she nodded once. Lesson learned, she said quietly. Keep moving. When the storm ended, and they staggered into the barracks, Cruz whispered hoarsely, she wanted that to happen. Thompson frowned. Wanted what? For us to fight back, Cruz said. She's pushing until we stop following orders and start understanding them. Miller leaned back against the wall, drenched and exhausted. She's not training soldiers, he murmured. She's building leaders. The next morning, Sarah didn't show up. For the first time in 4 weeks, the recruits stood waiting in silence. The air felt wrong without her. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, Chief Daniels appeared, expression grim. Lieutenant Commander Harlow's been called in for a debrief. You're on self-training today. Debrief? Reeves asked. About what? Daniels hesitated. She was in Kabul, lost most of her unit. They say she never recovered. He walked off, leaving the recruits stunned. Cruz broke the silence. That's why she looks at us like that. Like she's training ghosts. That night, Sarah returned. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't speak at first, just stared at them in the moonlight. Tomorrow, she said finally, you'll face your evaluation. If you fail, you're out. Cruz frowned. What kind of evaluation? The kind that doesn't care how much you've improved, she said. Only whether you can hold your team together when everything falls apart. No one slept that night. The next morning, a truck waited by the docks. Sarah stood beside it. Blindfolds on, she ordered. They obeyed. The truck rumbled for miles, rough roads jostling their bodies. When it stopped, the air smelled of salt and pine. Blindfolds off. They were on a remote stretch of coastline, waves crashing against jagged rocks. Sarah handed each of them a compass, a map, and a sealed envelope. This is your field test. Find your extraction point by sundown. Don't open your envelope unless you're lost. She turned to leave, then paused. Remember, The test isn't about reaching the end. It's about who you are when the path disappears. Then she drove off, the truck vanishing into the fog. Hours later, exhaustion set in. The terrain was brutal, thick brush, hidden cliffs, and deceptive turns. Thompson took the lead, compass in hand. But after 3 hours, the landmarks didn't match the map. They'd gone in circles. Reeves cursed under his breath. "We're lost." Cruz pulled out his envelope. "Maybe this is what it's for." Miller stopped him. "No," she said, "unless you're lost, but maybe she wants us to think that. Maybe it's another trap." Thompson snapped. "We are lost." The tension cracked like lightning. Voices rose. Accusations flew. 4 men who had fought together now turned on each other. Finally, Cruz ripped open his envelope. Inside was a single sentence. "When you stop trusting each other, you've already failed." The words hit like a gut punch. No map, no instructions, just the truth. They fell silent. The wind howled through the trees. Miller looked around slowly. "She planned this," he said. "All of it. Every step." Thompson exhaled shakily. "So what now?" Miller pointed toward the ridge. "We move together. No more arguments." By sundown, they stumbled onto a clearing. Sarah was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You made it," she said. Cruz dropped to his knees. "Barely." Sarah nodded. "Barely is still alive. And alive means ready." She looked at each of them in turn. "You fought. You fractured. But you rebuilt. That's what matters." She turned slightly toward the setting sun. "My team in Kabul forgot that lesson. They were strong, brave, but they forgot to trust. That's how I lost them." Silence. The recruits stood still, unsure how to respond. Sarah took a slow breath. "You're dismissed. Get rest. Tomorrow begins your final phase." As they walked away, Reeves glanced back at her, standing alone against the orange sky, wind pulling at her uniform, grief carved deep into her posture. She had broken them to rebuild them, not just for war, but for something more human. And though none of them could explain it, each one silently vowed they would never let her down. The sun disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sea blood red. The test was over, but something much bigger had begun. Sarah Harlow had seen her past buried in the surf that day, and 4 new recruits who just might redeem it. The base felt different that morning. Quieter, heavier, as if the air itself sensed something coming. Sarah Harlow walked briskly toward the command office, her boots striking sharp against the pavement. The 4 recruits she'd spent weeks forging were about to face their final evaluation. But she wasn't the one giving it. Inside, Commander Briggs, her superior, waited behind a desk stacked with reports. His uniform was immaculate, his expression cold. "Harlow," he said without looking up. "Sit." She remained standing. "Sir, I'd rather stand." Briggs sighed. "Still the same as Kabul, stubborn as hell. I call it conviction." He looked up then, eyes narrowing. "Conviction got half your unit killed." The words hit like a bullet. Sarah didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened around the folder she carried. Conviction kept the other half alive. Briggs rose, walking around the desk. "These recruits, Miller, Cruz, Reeves, Thompson, they're not soldiers yet. You've put them through unorthodox training. You've broken protocol, pushed boundaries, ignored regulations." She met his gaze. "And they're still standing. Isn't that the point?" He studied her for a long moment. "Their final test isn't yours to design anymore. Command wants to see if your methods worked. They'll be sent into a live simulation with minimal support." "What kind of simulation?" Briggs paused. "Hostage extraction." Abandoned freighter off the coast. They'll have 2 hours before the tide swallows it. Sarah's stomach dropped. That's not a simulation. That's a suicide run. Briggs's tone was flat. They either prove themselves or they don't. Sarah's voice hardened. Then I'm going with them. He shook his head. Denied. You observe from command. You're too close. She leaned forward. They're my responsibility. Briggs turned away. They were your experiment. Now they're the Navy's. 2 hours later, the recruits stood on the dock in full gear. The sky was a bruised gray, wind whipping across the waves. The freighter loomed in the distance, rusted, half submerged, its silhouette like a ghost. Sarah appeared just long enough to brief them. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of every unspoken warning. You'll insert from the east, she said, pointing at the map. Move low, stay tight. Communication blackout starts the moment you hit the deck. No contact with command. You're on your own. Miller nodded. Understood, ma'am. She hesitated, looking at each of them. Remember what I told you. Control doesn't come from strength. It comes from trust. Cruz grinned faintly. We'll bring your lesson back in one piece. Sarah allowed herself a rare smile. See that you do. The boat's engine roared to life. As it pulled away, she stood on the dock, her chest tight. The wind carried their voices, joking, shouting, alive. She prayed they'd stay that way. Inside the command center, Sarah watched the drone feed as the recruits reached the freighter. The hull groaned under the tide. The deck was a maze of twisted metal and collapsed cranes. Team Bravo, visual confirmed, said the technician beside her. They've breached the cargo bay. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. Maintain camera lock. Keep audio clear. The recruits moved in formation, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Miller led, with Cruz covering the rear. Reeves scanned corners while Thompson checked for movement. Then static. The feed flickered, the screen cutting to black. What happened? Sarah demanded. Signal interference, the tech said. Something on the ship's frequency jammed us. Sarah's pulse quickened. They're blind now. Briggs entered the room, arms folded. This is why I said it wasn't your call. They're not ready for live interference, Sarah snapped. You sent them in deaf and blind. Then they'll learn fast, he said coldly. Sarah turned back to the monitor, every nerve screaming to act. On the freighter, the recruits crouched in silence, flashlights flickering. We lost comms, Thompson muttered. No contact with base. Then we finished the mission, Miller said firmly. We find the hostages in exfil. Simple, Cruz snorted. Simple? This tub's about to become fish food. Reeves crouched near a rusted container door. Movement inside, he whispered. Miller signaled silently. They fanned out, weapons raised. The door creaked open. Inside, a speaker crackled to life. A distorted voice filled the chamber. Bravo team. You think this is a simulation? Think again. The voice wasn't command. It was Sarah, but not her normal tone. This was a recording. If you're hearing this, you've already failed the plan. Adapt. Trust your instincts. The map won't help you now. Cruz cursed under his breath. She set this up. Thompson smiled grimly. No, she's teaching us. They pressed on, navigating the dark corridors. Pipes dripped, metal groaned, the ship listing more with every wave. Then came the shout. Help. Over here. A figure in a Navy jumpsuit lay pinned under debris. Miller and Reeves rushed forward, lifting the metal beam. The man gasped for air. They locked others below deck. Engine room. Suddenly, the deck lurched. A deafening groan split the air. The hull was collapsing. Move, Miller shouted. They carried the injured man through rising water, slipping over debris. Cruz nearly went under. Thompson caught his arm. "Don't you quit on me now." Thompson roared. They pushed forward until they burst onto the upper deck. The extraction flare was gone, swept away by the tide. "Now what?" Cruz gasped. Miller looked at them, drenched, bleeding, terrified, and saw something shift. They were no longer trainees. They were a unit. "We improvise," he said. "Grab the line. We jump." One by one, they plunged into the black water. Back in command, Sarah's headset crackled. "Unknown distress signal, Quadrant 3. The technician shouted. She bolted upright. "Get me visuals." The screen flickered. 4 small figures in the surf, dragging one another toward the rescue boat. They made it. Sarah exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Briggs stood behind her, arms crossed. They completed extraction. Impressive. They completed it because they trusted each other, she said quietly. He nodded once. "Maybe your methods work after all." Sarah turned, her gaze hard. They didn't just pass a test. They became what this program is supposed to create. Soldiers who don't need orders to do what's right. Briggs studied her for a long moment before saying, "Then maybe you've finally forgiven yourself." She looked back at the screen, the 4 recruits laughing weakly as medics pulled them aboard. "Not yet," she said softly. "But it's a start." That night, when the recruits returned, Sarah met them at the dock. They were battered, bruised, exhausted, but their eyes burned with pride. Miller saluted. "Mission complete, ma'am." Sarah returned the salute. "You're not recruits anymore," she said. "You're SEAL candidates." Cruz grinned through a split lip. "So we passed?" Sarah smiled faintly. "You survived." "That's the same thing." Reeves looked at her curiously. "Ma'am, that recording on the ship, it was your voice. How long ago did you make it?" She hesitated. 3 years ago. For my team in Kabul." Silence fell. "Only," she continued quietly, "they never made it to the end." Miller stepped forward. "Then we carried that lesson for them." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. The storm had cleared, but her chest ached with something deeper than pride. "Maybe you did," she said finally. The sea shimmered under the moonlight as the wind whispered across the dock. The recruits walked away, stronger, united, reborn, while Sarah stood alone once again. But this time, she wasn't haunted by ghosts. She was surrounded by proof that her past hadn't been for nothing. The morning after the freighter test, the base buzzed with quiet disbelief. 4 recruits had entered an impossible mission and come back alive. That wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah Harlow walked across the tarmac, her uniform freshly pressed, her jaw set. Every salute she received felt hollow. The murmurs behind her, "That's the SEAL instructor." She trained them differently, trailed her like echoes. Inside the debriefing hall, the 4 recruits sat in a line, shoulders straight, faces raw from fatigue. Their hands were bandaged, their eyes red, but they were unbroken. Commander Briggs stood at the front of the room, a file open in his hands. "You disobeyed several direct parameters," he said flatly. "You improvised, acted without command clearance, and risked structural collapse." Thompson leaned forward. "With respect, sir, that's what kept us alive." Briggs's eyes flicked to Sarah. "Your recruits are bold." Sarah folded her arms. "They're not bold, sir. They're trained." Briggs shut the file. "Training isn't supposed to rewrite the rulebook." Sarah's tone hardened. "Maybe the rulebook's outdated." The silence that followed was razor-sharp. Then Briggs said, "You'll be relieved of command pending review." The recruits stirred in protest, but Sarah raised a hand, silencing them. "Understood, sir." As they filed out, Cruz shot Briggs a glare. "You're firing the only person who made us into something worth firing." Briggs ignored him. Later, in the mess hall, the recruits sat alone. The food was untouched again. "She saved us," Rees muttered. "And this is how they thank her." Thompson clenched his fists. "We can't just let them dump her like that." Miller's eyes were fixed on the table. "She won't fight for herself. But maybe we can." Cruz raised an eyebrow. "How?" Miller glanced toward the command tower. "By showing them what she taught us." That afternoon, the four marched into the training yard. Without orders, they began a full course run, but faster, harder, synchronized perfectly. Within minutes, other recruits stopped to watch. They scaled walls, dove into the surf, and dragged each other through mud. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a message. When Briggs came out to see the commotion, his expression was unreadable. "What is this?" he barked. Miller straightened, chest heaving. "This is Lieutenant Commander Harlow's method, sir. Team before self. Control through trust." Cruz added, "You can suspend her, but you can't erase what she built." For a long moment, Briggs said nothing. Then he turned to Sarah, who had arrived silently behind them. "Impressive," he said, his tone softer now. "But training fields are one thing. Real missions are another." Sarah's voice was steady. "Then send us on one." Briggs blinked. "You're serious? You wanted proof my methods work?" She said, "Give us a lav-op." He studied her for a moment, then exhaled. "Fine, but understand, this isn't a demonstration. It's deployment." Hours later, briefing screens lit up across the operations room. The recruits stood in full gear once again, faces grim but eager. Briggs pointed to a map of the Pacific. Cargo vessel Monarch Dawn, civilian ship hijacked near Guam, unknown hostiles. Minimal communication. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Extraction?" Briggs nodded. "Evacuate survivors and secure intel. You'll have minimal backup, just like before." Cruz muttered, "Guess he wants a repeat performance." Briggs ignored him. "This is a real mission, Harlow. Failure won't be graded. It'll be buried." Sarah met his eyes. Understood. The chopper roared through storm clouds, lightning flashing across the sky. Rain battered the windshield as the recruits checked their gear. "Deja vu," Thompson muttered. Miller smirked. "At least this time, it's not a test." Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "Everything is a test. Never forget that." The pilot's voice came through the comms. "Approaching drop zone. Minimal visibility." "Then we go dark," Sarah ordered. They rappelled down onto the slick deck of the Monarch Dawn, boots hitting hard metal. The ship was eerily quiet, save for the wind howling through broken cranes. "Stack up," Sarah whispered. "Stay tight." They moved like shadows through the corridors. A flickering light revealed overturned crates and signs of struggle. Then, a voice, trembling from the darkness. "Over here." A man in a torn life vest emerged, hands shaking. They took the others below deck. "Armed men?" "I hid when they started fighting." Before he could finish, a gunshot cracked through the hall. The man fell. "Contact!" Thompson shouted. They dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off the walls. Cruz returned fire, taking down one attacker, while Reeves flanked left. Sarah's voice was low but precise. "Don't chase kills. Secure positions." Her command snapped them into formation. Within minutes, the firefight ended. 3 hostiles down. The ship went silent again. "Status?" she asked. "All clear," Miller replied. Sarah knelt by the fallen civilian, eyes darkening. "We move fast. More could be below." They descended into the engine room, where the sound of waves grew louder. Water was already flooding in. "Ship's sinking," Reeves warned. "We've got 30 minutes tops." They found 2 survivors tied up near the rear bulkhead, one bleeding, one unconscious. "Extraction on the upper deck," Sarah said. Cruz, Thompson, carry them. Reeves, Miller, cover. The deck groaned beneath them as they ascended. Water surged in behind them like an angry tide. A metal beam crashed down. Sarah shoved Miller out of the way, taking the blow across her shoulder. She hit the deck with a grunt. "Ma'am, keep moving," she ordered. Miller grabbed her arm, refusing to leave. "Not this time." She met his eyes, and for a brief second saw her old team, the faces she'd lost in Kabul reflected in his defiance. Together, they climbed to the surface. As the chopper hovered above, ropes dropped. One by one, they ascended, the rescued civilians between them. Sarah went last. Halfway up, the cable jerked. The hook snapped loose from her harness. She fell. For one heartbeat, the world slowed, the ocean rushing up to meet her, rain stinging her face, her body twisting in midair. Then Miller's hand caught her wrist. His grip strained, tendons bulging. "Got you?" Sarah looked up, his face fierce, eyes burning. She climbed with his help, arm trembling, shoulders screaming in pain, until she was hauled into the chopper. They collapsed together on the floor, gasping. Cruz grinned weakly. "Ma'am, that's the second time we've pulled you out of the water." Sarah laughed softly, the sound half a sob. "Guess we're even." Hours later, back on base, Briggs met them at the landing pad. "Casualties?" "None," Sarah replied. "Mission complete?" "All objectives secured." Briggs looked at the recruits, filthy, bruised, exhausted, and then at Sarah. "Looks like your team earned their place." Sarah's voice was calm. "They earned it themselves." He nodded. "Then congratulations, Lieutenant Commander. You've got your command reinstated." Cruz whispered to Miller. "So does that make us her official team?" Sarah turned, overhearing. "No," she said. "That makes you SEALs." The 4 men grinned, pride glowing through their exhaustion. As the others dispersed, Sarah stayed behind, staring out at the dark sea. The wind carried the scent of salt and steel. For the first time in years, the ghosts of Kabul didn't whisper. Instead, she heard laughter, her new team's laughter, carried across the waves like an oath renewed. That night, under the pale light of her quarters, Sarah opened her journal and wrote one line. 4 new recruits surrounded her, and within 30 seconds, they realized she was not their test. She was their redemption. She closed the book, smiling faintly. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't training others to survive her mistakes. She was training them to live beyond them. 2 months had passed since the Monarch Dawn mission, and the recruits were no longer recruits. They were a certified SEAL team, officially designated Team Sentinel under Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow's command. Their mornings began before sunrise, sand runs, ocean dives, leave fire drills, all followed by Sarah's relentless debriefs that mixed brutal honesty with unwavering loyalty. The team had become a unit forged not just by training, but by shared survival. Miller, now acting second in command, often joked, "We should print shirts, trained by Harlow, survived by miracle." Sarah would smirk. No miracles, just muscle memory. But beneath her steel exterior, Sarah carried an unease she couldn't name. Ever since the Monarch Dawn up, she'd been waking at 0400, hearing distant echoes of gunfire, the ghosts of Kabul whispering again. And then, one dawn, those ghosts took form. The briefing Briggs summoned them to the operations center at 0500 sharp. The screens glowed with satellite feeds of an arid mountainous landscape, one Sarah knew too well. Briggs' voice was grave. Operation Sentinel Black. High priority. Intel confirms that an ex-Ally militia in northern Afghanistan has taken control of a former U.S. intel cache. Sarah's stomach turned cold. What kind of intel? Briggs hesitated. Names, safe houses, mission archives including details on your former unit. For a moment, the air in the room thinned. Thompson leaned forward. Wait, you mean the same team that? Sarah's tone was clipped. Yes, the team that didn't make it. Briggs nodded grimly. We believe the militia has found files naming them, and potentially you. If those files are sold to hostile states, we could be looking at multiple compromised agents. Cruz asked, extraction or destruction? Destruction, Briggs said. You leave nothing behind. Sarah's jaw tightened. What's our window? 48 hours. Deployment. The C-130 transport flew low over jagged peaks, its interior vibrating from the engines. The desert below looked endless, a sea of rust-colored stone and shadow. Sarah stood near the rear ramp, helmet on, eyes focused ahead. Miller joined her, scanning her expression. You've been quiet, he said. Just thinking, she replied. About Kabul? She didn't answer immediately. About ghosts that don't stay buried. Miller nodded. Then maybe it's time we bury them for good. The red light over the ramp flicked green. Sarah's voice cut through the roar. Move out. They parachuted into the dark like falling stars, chutes opening silently against the desert night. The approach they landed 3 clicks from the compound, an old CI, a listening post built into a canyon wall. The team advanced under cover of night, their gear blending with the shadows. Reeves whispered through comms. Thermal shows 5 heat signatures inside the outer wall. Possibly more deeper in. Sarah crouched beside him, eyes narrowing. We keep it surgical. Silent kills. No alarms. Cruz grinned. My kind of party. Within minutes, 2 sentries dropped soundlessly, their throats cut clean. The team breached the outer gate, moving in coordinated silence. Inside, the base was half ruined, sand creeping through cracks, cables dangling like vines. Thompson scanned the corridor. Doesn't look like they've been here long. Sarah replied, long enough to steal what they came for. As they turned a corner, voices echoed, harsh, accented, arguing over a laptop's glow. Sarah held up her fist. Positions. Miller nodded, then lobbed a flashbang. The detonation was blinding. Within seconds, the militia were down. But the victory was short-lived. On the laptop's cracked screen, a video feed played, a man's face in the shadows. Sarah froze. It was Commander Arif Shalani, once an Afghan liaison officer, and the man responsible for ambushing our old team years ago. He looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to her across time. Lieutenant Harlow, he said, voice calm and mocking. If you are seeing this, you've come for ghosts. You should know, I have one of yours. The screen glitched, then showed a live feed of a dimly lit cell. Inside, a man sat tied to a chair, bloodied but breathing. Miller whispered, Who the hell is that? Sarah's face went pale. That's Captain Ron Ellis, my old CO. He was supposed to be dead. The trap. Sarah's pulse thundered. She turned to Briggs over comms. Command, we've got a live hostage. Possible POW extraction. Sending coordinates. Briggs' reply crackled with static. Negative, Sentinel. Your orders are destruction only. No deviations. Sir, that's my former commanding officer. Doesn't change the mission? Sarah cut the comms. We're going. The team exchanged glances. No one hesitated. "Then let's move," Miller said. They followed the feed to an adjacent tunnel leading deeper into the canyon. The deeper they went, the thicker the tension became, the air heavy with the scent of oil and dust. Cruz muttered, "Feels too easy." Reeves nodded. "It's a setup." Sarah didn't argue. "Then we'll spring it on our terms." They entered the chamber, and the lights blazed on. Dozens of armed men surrounded them on the upper balconies, rifles trained. Shalani stepped out from the shadows, smirking. "You always were predictable, Commander." Sarah aimed her rifle. "And you always talk too much." He laughed. "You came for one man. I came for four." Then came the sound, explosives arming. The entire facility was rigged. "Down!" Sarah shouted. The first explosion tore through the lower level. The team scattered as debris rained down. Cruz was thrown against the wall, blood streaking his temple. Thompson dragged him behind cover. "Cruz is hit. Hold position." Sarah yelled. Miller fired upward, dropping 2 gunmen. Sarah grabbed a grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, and threw it into the control booth. Shalani dove aside as fire consumed the console. The alarms blared. The structure was collapsing. "Grab Ellis," Sarah shouted. Reeves cut the ropes around the captive's wrists, slinging him over his shoulder. The man was weak but conscious. "Team, exfil route Gamma," Sarah ordered. They sprinted through the crumbling tunnels, bullets chasing them, heat blistering the walls. The moment they burst into the night, the compound behind them erupted into a rolling inferno. They hit the sand, coughing, hearts hammering. "Everyone up," Sarah commanded. "Move to extraction." Cruz stumbled but nodded, supported by Thompson. Reeves kept Ellis steady. The helicopter appeared on the horizon, blades cutting through dust and flame. The aftermath hours later, back at base, Sarah stood outside the medical bay, watching through the glass as Ellis, frail, bandaged, received treatment. Briggs approached quietly. "You defied direct orders." Sarah didn't look away. "And saved a man you left for dead." He sighed. "You jeopardized the mission." She turned, eyes burning. "No, I completed it and brought back one of ours." For once, Briggs said nothing. Inside the bay, Ellis opened his eyes, looking at her through the glass. His lips moved, forming words she could read even without sound. "You did good, kid." Sarah exhaled slowly, emotion flickering behind her calm mask. Behind her, Miller stepped forward. "We lost the intel cache, but we got proof Jelani's alive. That means we're not done." Sarah nodded. "No, we're not." She looked out at the dawn breaking over the horizon, a pale orange bleeding into the desert sky. "The past isn't finished with us," she said quietly. "But now, neither are we." That evening, the team gathered in the mess hall. The air smelled of coffee and antiseptic. Cruz, bandaged and pale, lifted his mug. "To the ghosts who keep us moving." Reeves added, "And the commander refuses to let them win." Sarah smiled faintly. "To the living, and to making sure the dead didn't die for nothing." They clinked mugs. The bond between them had changed, no longer recruits or survivors, but something more. A family built from fire, fear, and faith. And though Sarah knew the fight with Jelani wasn't over, for the first time in years, she didn't dread what was coming next, because she wasn't facing it alone. The desert wind whipped through the canyon as Team Sentinel prepared for the final phase of Operation Sentinel Black. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Harlow stood at the head of her team, eyes scanning the rugged terrain ahead. 2 months of intelligence gathering, drone surveillance, and careful planning had led them here, Jelani's hidden compound deep in the mountains. Satellite imagery confirmed heavy armament, booby traps, and multiple hostages. This was the culmination of everything Sarah had survived, trained for, and endured. "Everyone ready?" she asked, voice calm but resolute. "Ready, ma'am," the team chorused. Miller, acting second in command, checked their gear one last time. "We move as one. No deviations, no heroics. Trust each other." Sarah's lips twitched with a faint smile. "Exactly. Let's finish this." Insertion. They approached via stealth helicopters, cloaked in darkness, the rotors slicing through the night like knives. Each recruit's heart pounded, adrenaline and anticipation colliding. Landing on a narrow ridge overlooking the compound, Sarah surveyed the layout. Jalani's forces were alert, but unaware of their proximity. Cruz whispered, "Feels like déjà vu. Only bigger." Sarah glanced at him. "Then make it count." They rappelled down silently, shadows melting into the terrain. Every step was measured. Every gesture communicated. They had mastered unspoken commands, a language Sarah had drilled into them through weeks of relentless training. The approach inside the compound, traps were everywhere. Tripwires, pressure sensors, and motion-sensitive cameras. Sarah's eyes scanned, noting each hazard. Reeves disarmed a crude explosive on the main corridor. "One wrong step, and we're toast," he muttered. "Then don't make a wrong step," Sarah replied. They moved like ghosts through the compound, neutralizing guards silently, each member perfectly in sync. Miller handled a locked gate. Cruz cleared a hallway. Thompson provided overwatch. Finally, they reached the central control room. Jalani was there, pacing, holding a tablet displaying a live feed of hostages scattered throughout the compound. "Lieutenant Harlow," he sneered. "I wondered how long it would take you to come for me. And you brought children to my playground." Sarah's voice was ice. "This playground ends tonight." The confrontation Jalani triggered a panic alarm. Lights flashed, and armed guards rushed toward them. "Positions." Sarah barked. The firefight was brutal but precise. Thompson covered their rear, taking out shooters as Miller and Cruz moved toward Jalani. Reeves secured the hostages, keeping them calm. Sarah advanced, rifle raised, eyes locked on Jalani. The man was smug, confident, but he underestimated the team. "You've lost before, Hollow," he spat. "Your team died in Kabul because of you." Sarah's pulse surged, but her voice remained steady. "They didn't die because of me. They died because I trusted the wrong people. But this time, I control the outcome." Turning point, Jalani bolted for a side exit with a hostage in tow. Miller lunged, tackling him into a wall. Cruz neutralized the remaining guards. Thompson secured the hostages, while Reeves swept the area for additional threats. The fight was close, physical, chaotic, a mirror of every memory Sarah had buried in Kabul. But unlike the past, she was not alone. Her team fought as extensions of her will, perfectly synchronized. Sarah confronted Jalani, hand gripping his collar. "It ends here." Jalani struggled, but she stared into his eyes. "You lost. You underestimated loyalty. You underestimated trust. And you underestimated me?" She slammed him against the wall. With backup signals, extraction units arrived moments later. Jalani was restrained, hostages safe. Aftermath hours later, the team returned to base. The mission was a success. Every hostage rescued, Jalani captured, the intel destroyed. Command hailed the operation as a flawless victory. Sarah walked slowly through the base, reflecting. For years, she had carried the weight of failure, the ghosts of Kabul lingering like shadows. But now, she had her redemption, not only hers, but that of her fallen team. The 4 recruits followed her into the debriefing hall. Briggs stood at the front, expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Commander," he said finally, "your methods may be unorthodox, but they produce results. I commend your leadership and your team's execution." Sarah nodded once. "Thank you, sir. But this wasn't about me. It was about them?" Briggs gestured toward the 4 recruits. "And them?" "They're no longer recruits," Sarah said softly. "They're SEALs. They fought, adapted, survived, and saved lives." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Closure that night, Sarah sat alone on the tarmac, the desert wind carrying the scent of sand and salt. She pulled out her journal, flipping to the page she had started months ago. 4 new recruits surrounded her. Within 30 seconds, they realized she was a Navy SEAL. She wrote a final line beneath it. Now they realize they are SEALs too. The team approached quietly. Miller handed her a cup of coffee. "You think this is over?" Sarah shook her head. "The mission may be, but the fight, the lessons never end." Cruz smirked. "Then we're ready for whatever comes next." Reeves added, "Because we've got the best instructor ever." Sarah glanced at them, pride and relief mingling. "No, because you trust each other. That's what makes a team. I just showed you the way." Thompson stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we keep moving forward. Together." She nodded. For the first time in years, she felt a lightness she hadn't known. The ghosts weren't gone. They never would be. But now, she had living proof that their sacrifice had meaning. Legacy weeks later, Team Sentinel became a model for training new SEAL teams. Sarah's techniques, once questioned and dismissed, were codified into operational manuals. Miller, Cruz, Reeves, and Thompson mentored future recruits, instilling the same lessons Sarah had taught: trust, control, discipline, and the understanding that a team's strength was greater than any individual. Sarah watched them from the sidelines during a training session. 4 new recruits, unaware of her presence, struggled through the obstacle course, fumbling, exhausted, frustrated. She smiled faintly, recalling her first lessons with Miller, Cruz, Reeves, and Thompson. "Every great SEAL starts as someone who doesn't know they can survive," she whispered. And just like that, the cycle began anew. Final reflection that night. Standing under a clear sky, Sarah looked at the stars and thought of her fallen team, her ghosts from Kabul. "They weren't wasted," she whispered. "Their lessons live on." She turned to see her team, 4 men who had been rookies, now warriors, walking back toward her, laughing quietly, carrying their gear with ease. 4 new recruits had surrounded her once, realizing within 30 seconds who she was. Now, those same 4 stood beside her, not just as soldiers, but as a living testament to her strength, resilience, and the enduring power of trust. For Sarah Harlow, the past was no longer a chain. It was a foundation. And the future was theirs to command.